Eleanor Roosevelt had this great quote. She said that poor minds talk about other people, average minds talk about events, but great minds, they talk about ideas. Yeah, of course I believe in LGBT rights. Of course I believe in women's rights. Of course I believe in minority rights. You know why? Because they're all individual rights. We all have rights as individuals. General Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated American soldiers in all of history, wrote an entire book called War is a Racket. The value of the dollar has gone down by over 96% in the last 100 years. The Second Amendment is not there so that we can go outside and hunt rabbits. It's there to keep us free. And actually, I would argue that if anyone needs the Second Amendment, it's minorities. Historically, unarmed minorities fare the worst in all of history. Those are the genocides we all hear about. Look, violence is wrong, all right? Whether it's cops or whether it's riots, it's unacceptable in a civilized society. You know what really gets me is everyone knows that the largest polluter on Earth is the U.S. government. All right. So how are they the ones going to solve the problem? You know what's insane is we have the largest prison population in the entire world, and over half of them are for non-violent crimes. Welcome to the Take On Everything podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Welcome to Take On Everything. What we are taking on today, we're taking on two cases of what I think are really important events to kind of dissect for two reasons. One, because they are so tragic and they have hit, 2020 has been a crazy year. And I think these are really good examples of not only things that are tragic in themselves, but kind of symptoms of a larger problem that I think it's really important to understand or at least acknowledge. So the first story, the first case I want to talk about a little bit is Brianna Taylor. I think everybody knows a little bit about the story. You may have feelings one way or another. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of, oh yeah, but, oh yeah, he's said, she said stuff. And I think it's really important to analyze this from two different perspectives. One is like, okay, what actually did happen, right? And then, come to some good conclusions there and really dissect it. And the other thing is to step back real quick and look at it from a theoretical perspective. Like, okay, what happened, like regardless of what the specific facts are, what are the things we can agree on? Because a lot of people are going to claim one thing or another. Some people say that it's the boyfriend's fault or it's her fault or something about drugs or whatever. So there's always an excuse to, either discredit somebody or dehumanize them or anything like that. So I think first I want to go over like the specifics of the case, and then I want to go over why it's important and why some of those details aren't really as important as you think they are, because it really speaks to a broader issue of, should you be safe in your own home? Should you be killed for doing something that's nonviolent? Should you be able to defend yourself if you think somebody's breaking into your home? Like bigger questions, like let's assume that she was dealing drugs, or let's assume that the boyfriend was dealing drugs, or none of those two things are not the case, but let's pretend they are. So I want to do a little bit of that too. So first, I want to read, I'm going to kind of scroll through an article that was written by Radley Balco. Radley Balco is a fantastic columnist, author, writer, and he studies a lot of what he describes as the rise of the militant police. So I think sometimes in our heads we get this idea that police are here to serve and protect, which that's the idea. I've only seen a couple episodes of this, but like Barney Fife, right? So he's like the ideal, like kind of like go lucky, cop, like walk the beat, talk to people. He knows everybody. He tries to handle disputes. He's not running around arresting everybody, but he would go try to make sure everyone is safe, to serve and protect, and really would only intervene if he really had to. He's kind of a scaredy cat, but I think it was the idea. It's the police officer that knows everyone's name, is looking out for everybody. If you had maybe too many to drink, maybe he'd drive you home instead of like put you in a cell and charge you. I'm not to encourage that type of behavior, but it's just like, the more local and local interaction you get with police officers, the less kind of scary it is, and the less you're just going to end up in jail. So you develop a good reputation and good rapport with between police and civilians, and I think that's some of the idyllic understanding that a lot of us have about the police. And Radley Balco has been documenting since the mid '90s this rise in the difference, the span, the distance between the police and the community that they're serving and protecting. And so he does a great job. He's got a book called The Rise of the Warrior Cop. And so it kind of goes through, starting after the first Gulf War, a lot of the soldiers coming home and then being, brought into the police department with their military training, and then in addition to that, a lot of the subsidized police programs that would give a lot of military, excess military equipment, whether it be MRAPs, armored vehicles, some rifles. That was a new thing on the streets, is bringing semi-automatic rifles onto the streets, the combat weapons, for police to use, when before it was mostly non-lethal or handguns or something that, wasn't necessarily a weapon of war. So it's kind of just this documentation and this evolution of what police in the United States have become, and I think he does really good work with that. He's very fair. I like him. He's very data driven, which I really appreciate. I don't like a lot of the hyperbole, but I do like somebody who's data driven and can really bring some clarity to. It's like, hey, is this really what we want to be as a country? Like, have we fallen so far to where this is really what we want to put our stamp of approval on, or is there something that we can really learn from and benefit from by changing and understanding some of the bad consequences that it's having? So that's why I really want to talk about the Brianna Taylor case. So I'll give you the quick overview, and then we'll go through some specific misconceptions about it. So the general story is Brianna Taylor, who is a 26-year-old EMT in Louisville, Kentucky. Her and her boyfriend had a place in Louisville. She had come home from, I think it was a 12-hour shift, and they stayed up till like 12:30, watched some TV, unwind and relax like most people do. After a long shift at work, you just want to relax. So you go, and then you go to bed. Little did they know that a search warrant, specifically a no-knock warrant, had been issued for both her residence and 3 other residents. So not both, but in addition to 3 other residences, in conjunction with the 3 other search warrants, which centered around her ex-boyfriend's drug dealing past. Actually, I'm pretty sure he just continued to deal drugs, and from what I understand about Brianna Taylor's family, that's what they said. That's why they broke up, is she wanted to move on with her life, and he kind of was stuck in this kind of drug dealer lifestyle, and she didn't want a part of that. So she found herself a better man, Kenneth Walker, who, by all accounts, is a law-abiding, upstanding citizen. And they were doing well together. So they went to bed. The police had been staking out their apartment since about 10 o'clock that evening, so they waited for them to go to bed so they could serve this no-knock warrant. There's a couple different accounts here, so this is one of the things we'll touch on in a little bit, but the police say they knocked on the door, no answer. Then they started to break down the door, and then there was a gunshot in the house, and then from the outside of the house the officers began to open up fire, and Brianna Taylor was shot and killed. I think there were 28 bullets that were fired, and she was hit multiple times, and she ended up dying in her home. The boyfriend during and immediately after the gunfire. Brianna Taylor was conscious and on the floor of the apartment for about 20 minutes before she died. The boyfriend called 911, reporting that there had been an attempted home invasion and his girlfriend was shot and he didn't know what to do. You can hear audio of this phone call. It's a little disturbing, but I did listen to it. I couldn't imagine being in that situation. He seemed completely genuine, and his first reaction was somebody's trying to break into the house and they're shooting at the house. I don't know what to do, because this went on for some time. And his immediate concern was for Brianna Taylor. The boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, was then arrested once he realized the police were there, he put his gun down. He was then arrested for assaulting a police officer. I believe he the shot that he shot at the door did hit one of the officers in the leg. So he was arrested for that. Brianna Taylor died. And then here begins the whole, in the wake of George Floyd and a lot of the civil unrest from earlier that year, this really fueled some of the fires that we saw, especially over the summer. I think partially contributed by successive horrific cases of violence against people by the police. Whether you believe it's right or wrong, they are tragic stories, and I think in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a lot of people being stressed about losing their jobs and feeling helpless, and then having these just brutal cases being brought to the forefront, I think really was the perfect storm for a lot of the civil unrest that we saw. And in my opinion, it was kind of, for good reason. A lot of the outrage was for good reason, because this is such a tragic case. So here's where some people start to diverge. There's a lot of, again, there was speculation that Kenneth Walker, some people believe Kenneth Walker, the new boyfriend, was also dealing drugs. The police have confirmed that is not the case. He was never suspected of any drugs. Other people believe that the gun was unregistered and an illegal firearm. This is also not the case. In Kentucky, you do not need to have a permit to have a registered firearm. However, Kenneth Walker actually went the additional step, took training courses, and got a concealed carry permit, taking the extra step to be a law-abiding legal gun owner and carrier, and trained to use the firearm. Another misconception here, and this is still not 100% confirmed either way. The police said that they announced themselves. Some officers said that they, both by announcing, knocked on the door and then said they were the police. There were two other officers that did not say that they said they were the police. They just said they knocked on the door. Out of the 16 neighbors that were interviewed, 15 said they did not hear anything, and one said that they heard knocking. And a lot of people touted this as, well, see, they knocked, so it wasn't a no-knock raid, no-knock warrant. And unfortunately, the whole point of something not being, if you want to claim that it's you knocked and you announced yourself, well, somebody should be able to hear it, right? So if all of the neighbors in the apartment complex, save for one, heard nothing, and then the one heard knocking and didn't know what it was, I don't know how that argument. The Supreme Court has ruled that in order for a warrant to be considered not a no-knock warrant, they have to make every necessary attempt to announce themselves, not just by knocking, but also that they are police. And no one has claimed that they heard anybody say that they are police, but there was knocking on the door. So that's and some people say, well, people were asleep, blah, blah, blah. Again, that kind of defeats the argument. If somebody's asleep, and then your goal is to knock on the door to wake them up, if no one wakes up, none of the neighbors hear it, and nobody wakes up, nobody knows you're police, well, how is Kenneth Walker, the gentleman who shot at the door, thinking that he was being broken into, how is he supposed to know, right? So those are some of the misconceptions. And again, back to the no-knock warrant thing. The warrant itself, again, was one of 4 that were literally carbon copies of each other, all saying this is a no-knock warrant. They said the person inside is a drug dealer. They could be getting rid of evidence or could be violent toward police. This brings up another issue as far as the legality of the warrants that were issued. The Supreme Court has also ruled again regarding no-knock warrants that they have to be precise in the person or persons and the location specific to that person that the no-knock warrant is issued for. And it has to be just cause, justly proven that the person is a significant threat to police or to the destruction of evidence in order for that to be considered and granted as a no-knock warrant. At the time of the raid, the person that was specified in all four of the warrants, just copied and pasted literally, was her ex-boyfriend, who was already in custody at the time that the raid was executed. In fact, the police chief of the Louisville Police Department said that they knew that Brianna Taylor was quote-unquote a soft target, whereas her ex-boyfriend was a hard target, as in somebody who could potentially, you can make an argument that you needed a no-knock warrant, no-knock raid for that. But recognize that she was a soft target, which is why they knocked, because they knew. So the legality of the warrant is in serious question. And I think that we need to understand that if these types of warrants are just rubber stamped by judges, I believe her name is Mary Shaw. Mary Shaw was the judge that signed off on all four of these warrants, probably didn't read them because they were literal copies of each other. If she did read them, it's evidence of a larger problem that they're just signing off on warrants and they don't really care. They know they're all carbon copies, so they're really not following the Supreme Court. Or she just didn't read that specific one, or they're all just carbon copies of everything, right? So either way, the Supreme Court has rulings have been violated by not specifying that the specific persons and places and why they are deemed a threat. Because Brianna Taylor was a soft target. She was never suspected of being involved in drug deal. But the reason why they executed the search warrant on that residence was to see there had been packages received there, which the police did later confirm were shoes and clothes. They did not find any drugs. They did not find any illegal weapons. They did not find anything illegal at all in that raid. So we're calling into question the legality of the warrants that were actually used, trying to clarify some of the misconceptions or things that you can't quite, we don't know in the heat of the moment because we don't have good body cam footage. And so I think one of the biggest things to understand is that there's obviously a systemic problem in how these no-knock warrants and no-knock raids are executed. It's a no-knock warrant, yet they knew they weren't supposed to use that, so they tried to knock anyway, but nobody heard the knock. So it's you can make an argument this is an administrative issue, but it's there's 4 warrants right here. That's a lot. It's a fair amount of warrants. Imagine how many other times it's been done. And there's been other studies that have been conducted by people like Radley Balco that sit in departments. Actually, I think I have this gentleman's name. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he was embedded in the Louisville Police Department for a year, just to as a journalist to kind of see what the procedures are, and he noted that 90+% of these warrants are fairly much copy and paste, same type of language, same type of information, and really didn't change from person to person, with a few exceptions. So I think that's something that we should bear in mind and consider, not just specifically, again, looking at the Brianna Taylor case, but looking at this from a broad point of view. Is like, hey, maybe it's not just this particular thing where everything went wrong. Maybe this was stuff that's preventable, and it's a problem that we need to address systemically. And we need to look and maybe if this is in other police departments as well, which is a case I'm going to cover here just in a little bit. Another misconception is that some people on the side of Brianna Taylor claim that they were asleep and they were shot in their beds. This is not true. They were, from Kenneth Walker's testimony after the fact, they were in bed, they were asleep or falling asleep. They heard loud banging on the door Kenneth Walker was concerned, thought there was a break-in, got his firearm. Brianna Taylor also then got up and from his testimony came behind him. He fired a warning shot as the door was being kicked in. Realized it was the police, put the gun down, but they had already been shot at, and the police had already been shot at and started firing from the exterior of the apartment. So they were not actually asleep. That was one of the early things that came out, and people were like, "Oh, they shot him while they were in bed sleeping." That's not exactly what happened. As most stories happen, a lot of this pans out as time goes, and there's a lot of initial reactions that happen that are not exactly true. One thing that did disappoint me in watching the saga of this story was a lot of people that there's nothing wrong with being pro-police. I just feel like you should be pro-human being. Whether you're a police officer or Brianna Taylor or Brianna Taylor, you should just be pro-person. So if somebody dies, it should be a tragedy. But immediately, people began sharing the misinformation that she was a drug dealer and the packages were hers, that she was dealing the drugs out, and tying her to all this other stuff. So it's like kind of like a discredit somebody's character in order to make their death not seem so bad. And I was really disappointed in seeing that happen instead of people recognizing this is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for Brianna Taylor. It's a tragedy for Kenneth Walker, who survived her. It's a tragedy for the officer that killed somebody. He's got to live with that the rest of his life. It's a tragedy for Brianna Taylor's family, Brianna Taylor's child. It's a tragedy for Jamarcus Glover, who's her ex-boyfriend. He apparently broke down crying when he was when they told him that she was killed, because he genuinely cared for her. Obviously, he didn't make the decisions I would have made. I did make in my life, but he's a human being, and he has to live with now. It's potentially his fault, in one way or another, that she's dead. And I think that failing to recognize the tragedy on all sides is part of why a lot of us are so just divided on this stuff, instead of just recognizing the humanity. Like the people are, hating all cops doesn't help. That's a cop is a real person. He just killed somebody. I don't think he woke up that morning and wanted to kill somebody. Yes, he went and did something that was, I think, highly irresponsible, but that was what he was told to do. Like it's hard to expect people to not do their job, especially as a police officer. They do these kinds of things a lot, which again I think is a problem in itself, but I can't necessarily blame those officers. There's probably things they could have done better, but this system where this poor warrant was issued, this judge signed off on a warrant, obviously without reading it, or without any consideration to that they knew that she was a soft target, that Brianna Taylor was a soft target, and this Judge Mary Shaw just signed off on it anyway, essentially signing a death warrant. I would almost blame Mary Shaw a little bit more than I would the police officers, because they essentially literally executed a warrant from Mary Shaw and she said, hey, go get this person, and by any means necessary, you can use this deadly force and this lethal force in order to serve this warrant on this person who that the police department knew was a soft target. So there's so many things here that it's like just blaming the police. So that's another thing that came out of it, is a lot of people on Brianna Taylor's strictly on Brianna Taylor's side, who I considered myself to be somebody who was extremely sympathetic and very upset at her death. People sharing my sympathies also then just pointed to the police and said, arrest the police and charge them with murder and all this. And while, I'm again sympathetic to that argument, and I do think that if there was misconduct happening, I think they absolutely should be charged. The problem is, it's not technically illegal. They were following a legal order, and I think that's the heart of the problem, is police are following a legal order, which gets somebody killed. Maybe it's not the police that are the problem, it's the system that's the problem. This system that just arbitrarily issues these no-knock warrants and breaks into people's houses at 1 o'clock in the morning or 12:40 in the morning. What are you doing at 12:40 in the morning? I'm fast asleep. I sleep with a gun next to my bed. I have been in the situation where somebody broke my window and was reaching through my door to get in my house, and guess what? I had my gun and I said, "Excuse me, sir, would you please leave?" Right? It was daytime, So I wasn't freaked out. I wasn't awoken and jarred from deep sleep, and I didn't have my gun as somebody was literally breaking down my door. It was much more mellow than what Kenneth Walker and Brianna Taylor experienced. So I can't imagine being in that situation, and putting a civilian in that situation. It just seems like that should not be the first reaction or their first response of police officers, even if she had drugs in the house. She shouldn't have died. It's a non-violent crime that she had committed. She wasn't hurting anyone. She was asleep, not threatening anyone. Yet the system decided that it was best to break into her home and shoot her home, than it was to, I don't know, maybe send her a summons, say, hey, we think you have some weed or whatever it was. It just seems a little disproportionate, right? It's a disproportionate reaction for an offense that was not killing or hurting anyone. She was then killed and hurt for, and now her boyfriend has to live with that, and the police officer that pulled the trigger has to live with that, and Brianna Taylor's family and daughter and boyfriend and ex-boyfriend and the community have to live with that, and we as a society have to live with that. And I think that cost is not okay. I'm not okay with it. I hope you're not okay with it. So I just wanted to give like a little overview of that, my little taste, my little interpretation of that whole scenario. I think it's something we need to learn from. And I think we get too caught up in this particular person did this particular thing wrong and we should go after them. Or Brianna Taylor was involved in drugs, therefore I don't care that she died. I think that is way too narrow to look at this. I think this is an opportunity to really, really, really take a hard look at what we do and what we think is okay and how we interact with each other in a society of what I hope would be peace and understanding and cooperation and all of these things that I think most human beings hold dear. And maybe there's a better way we can deal with marijuana potentially in somebody's house, which again, she didn't have any marijuana in her house, and neither did her law-abiding boyfriend, and people are now dead for it. So again, I just wanted to talk about that from a literal and then theoretical perspective, and just encourage everyone to, when you hear stories like this, like Eric Garner, like Brianna Taylor, like George Floyd, that you not only look at the specific instance, but also take a look at, okay, is this something that we can prevent? Is this something we should be introspective about? Is this something that we need to consider, that maybe this isn't okay? Because I think what happens, especially, you've seen a lot of protests and riots from 2011, 2014, 2015, now in 2020, you're seeing a big resurgence of just civil unrest. And I think it's because we just focus so narrowly on this person, I'm on this person's side, they were good, these people are bad, and then, one person goes to jail or doesn't go to jail or whatever, and then that's it. We don't ever consider the things that led to that. So I think we should take these opportunities, whatever side you come down on the Brianna Taylor case, whether you support the police, you support Brianna Taylor. I would hope that you don't support people being murdered, or I consider it murder, but being killed in their homes. I also believe in the castle doctrine. I don't believe that we as a society should condone people being killed in their homes for weed. I would hope that we could at least agree on that piece and see if there's some things we can change in the future so these kinds of things don't happen. So that's all I really want to say about Brianna Taylor. I think it's a tragedy. I think we need to look a little bit more broadly and see what we can do better. As a side note, the mayor of Louisville did issue an order to ban no-knock warrants and no-knock raids, which I thought was great. Just remember that it's not a permanent ban. It's also not a legally binding ban, and it also goes away as soon as that mayor is not in office. So it's not a permanent solution. It's a very temporary solution, but hey, it's something. I think it's good. I don't like no-knock warrants and no-knock raids. I don't think they're worth it, especially considering over a substance that, while it does have detrimental effects on some people, there is no immediate violence. Nobody was in immediate danger, even if there were drugs in the apartment. So I think that maybe we should reevaluate some of these things. The next story I want to talk about, this was a little bit closer to home, both literally and figuratively. There's a gentleman that was killed in Maryland, which is my home state, in Montgomery County. His name was Duncan Lemp. He did not make as much of a news splash as Brianna Taylor and George Floyd, but I think his case is just as significant in some ways. I know that the additional narrative of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd being people of color, minorities that experienced police brutality, it has the additional emotional reaction that stems from, I think, this unhealed wound of race division in our country. But this gentleman I'm about to talk about, he was a Caucasian male. He's a young guy. He's 21 years old, lived in Maryland. His story is eerily similar to Breonna Taylor's story. He lived in Silver Spring, Maryland. He was killed around the same time in March of 2020. There's laws all around the country, mostly on the state level. They're called red flag laws. So essentially the idea is that that guns are bad, right? And guns in the wrong hands are really bad, right? So red flag laws were intended to give an opportunity for law enforcement to seek out people that may not be legally allowed to own weapons, or people that they consider to be radicalized, or people that they consider to be generally dangerous, or so again, these are very kind of like broad terms, if you see what I'm getting at. So the idea is, hey, yeah, let's take guns away from bad people. We'll go take them away and everybody will be safer. I get that. I understand that. However, the problem with using general and non-specific terms is it really leaves it open to interpretation. So essentially what happened in this case, Duncan Lemp, 21-year-old, was not legally allowed to own. He did have some rifles. He had 3 rifles and 2 pistols in his possession. That I believe the rifles were not technically Maryland legal, and he did have a juvenile record, which, according to Maryland law, prohibits anyone from owning a firearm that until they're 30 years old. So someone told the police that Duncan Lemp had these weapons. The police found out about his juvenile record, and then, through the red flag laws, decided to go get the weapons. Instead of, again, this kind of goes to how do we conduct ourselves in a civilized society, and how do we interact with each other and socially cooperate. Instead of issuing a summons or asking him to come down and talk or anything like that, this is what Montgomery County Police did. 4:30 in the morning, they bust down the door of this guy's house. They go into his room while he and his pregnant girlfriend are sleeping. Duncan Lemp sleeps. This is what his girlfriend has said, as his girlfriend did survive this. Duncan Lemp sleeps with a rifle by his bed, but did not pick it up or have it in his hands when the police entered the room. The police entered the room, saw the weapon, opened fire, and killed him. He was still in bed, and that has been confirmed. The bullet holes and the blood was on the bed. He was killed right next to his girlfriend. And then they recovered the gun. So, mission accomplished, I guess. And it's such... every time I see a story like this, I just think, is this okay? Okay, I get guns are dangerous, right? But if your solution to guns are dangerous are let's kill people before they have the chance to be dangerous, I don't follow the logic there. I think again, well-intentioned programs and well-intentioned laws have these unintended consequences that, when interpreted broadly and mishandled or used incorrectly, have detrimental consequences. So this young guy, full of potential, he was developing a startup software engineering company. Had high hopes. Earlier this year, he and his girlfriend had went and looked at a nice place in West Virginia. He wanted to kind of get out of Montgomery County and just have a little bit more space because they were pregnant. He was thinking about the baby. They were looking to buy a home out in West Virginia. He liked the country a little bit, but still wanted to be close enough to where he could, successfully run his business. And so he was planning his life. He was doing his thing. He was a gun enthusiast, right? And he had these guns, but there was no indication that he was dangerous to anyone. That wasn't the claim. The claim was just that he wasn't supposed to have them. And he died for it. And again, it's just like, are we okay with this? And some of the anti-gun people are going to be like, yeah, well, he shouldn't have had them. It's his fault. He should have complied. He should have not had them. So yeah, he kind of deserved to die. But I remember hearing that type of argument from people that were okay with Brianna Taylor being killed. Well, she was hanging around drug dealers, or she had drugs. She probably smokes weed. She has this past. It's okay. Same thing with George Floyd. He's on drugs, man. Like, of course he was gonna die anyway. He has a record. He did this. He did that. He kind of deserved to die. Do you see where I'm going? Right? Instead of realizing that this is a human being, all right, a young man, a young guy, with a lot of potential, obviously intelligent. I can't write code. This guy has all the potential in the world. Starting a family. But he just so happens to be a gun enthusiast. Never has no record of really hurting anyone. Hasn't threatened anyone with the weapons. So I'm just encouraging you, take a step back, and don't fall into the same trap that you clearly see when people try to discredit the lives of Brianna Taylor and Eric Garner and George Floyd. Oh, these were bad people. They kind of deserve to die. These are human beings. All right. And I don't feel that if we live in a civilized society, as we like to consider ourselves, that these are acceptable outcomes. I don't like it. I don't think it's okay. If somebody's not being violent, I don't think you have the right to initiate violence against them to go for the greater good, whether it's drugs or whether you want to get the guns out of his hands. If you do want to get the guns out of his hands, does it have to be this way? Do you have to break into his house at 4:30 in the morning next to his pregnant girlfriend and kill him? Like, is that really the most effective way to? Why didn't we try? Hey, Duncan, you're not supposed to have these guns. Imagine Barney Fife, right? Let's go back to that. Barney Fife's like, hey man, you're not supposed to have that. Why don't you just bring him down to the station? We'll call it a day. I don't want to go. I don't want this to go any farther. What do you think would happen, right? He may have said, no, I'm not going to do it. There's no way. I'm a crazy person. I refuse to follow the law. I'm going to get all upset and whatever. Okay, then maybe something like this is justified if you subscribe that he should not have weapons. Why didn't anybody try that? Why didn't anybody say, hey, Brianna, do you mind if we just look around, right? Right, that's kind of the point of a warrant. Like, hey, do you mind if we check this box that we have evidence of it coming here and it's supposed to be, we think there's drugs in it. Do you mind if we look? No. They went and shot Brianna Taylor. And they went and shot Duncan Lemp. And I'm not okay with it. I don't think it's okay. And the reason why I picked these two specific examples is because I want to talk to people on both the right and the left, all right? I don't really like that spectrum, but there's a lot of people that consider themselves on one or the other side of that spectrum. And you both use the same arguments to justify, I don't like these people, so I'm okay if they're oppressed or if something bad happens to them. But people that I identify with, I'm not okay with that, right? And so my challenge to you is these are all human beings, right? And and just because you may not agree with them doesn't make them any less human. And it doesn't make them any less worthy of living their life. And it doesn't make them any more deserving of being essentially murdered in their home. So I just wanted to give a little bit of food for thought on that. As a side note, Duncan Lemp's daughter was born in October of this year without a dad. So it's just one of those consequences that a lot of people just don't consider. And I think that's a tragedy. So as you go about your lives and you're thinking about no-knock raids and no-knock warrants and red flag laws and drug laws and gun laws and all these things, don't forget the human element of all of the unintended consequences and the human suffering that stems from this system, and whether we really feel the need to kind of impose morality or impose our opinions on other people, if these are the unintended consequences. And I would just kind of maybe throw that as a little bit of a food for thought, and just keep your mind open, consider the possibilities. All right, guys, that's really all I've got. I just really wanted to touch on these things. I think they're really important concepts to understand and think through, both in a very limited and like an analysis type way, and also in a broader scheme, just to kind of like, okay, let's talk about this as a concept and not as a specific event. I think that helps to kind of bring us together, and I hope that's my whole goal with this podcast, is to kind of bring people together and to maybe share some ideas and challenge a little bit and see and try to end some of like the division that I think all of us at one time or another, or a lot especially this year, are subject to. And I think it's a lot of people trying to push us apart, and I don't think it's necessary. So I'm here trying to pull us back together, see if we can get on the same side, the side of humanity, the side of human life, the side of human freedom, cooperation, and just believing in human beings, that they can make good decisions, and that maybe using the state violence against people is not the correct answer. So yeah, that's my food for thought. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. It's wonderful to have you guys as an audience. If you want to support the show, I do have a sponsor. It's called Liberty Classroom. Liberty Classroom is a one-stop shop for college and high school level courses on so many different subjects, from history to economics to money to the Constitution, to law, natural law, positive law, all kinds of wonderful topics that are great building blocks for freedom and liberty, and America, and being a good citizen or a citizen of the world, or whatever it is. You can learn a ton from these courses. They're taught by PhD professors, highly accomplished people, in a really easy to access format. You can take it as seriously or as lightly as you want. There's PowerPoints, there's tests, there's reading materials, there's lectures. You can download them as audiobooks and throw them on your phone, or if you still have an iPod. No, I'm just kidding. Nobody has those things anymore. But I have it on my phone. I listen to it on the way to work every day. I've got a nice little commute, and I think they're wonderful. And I've learned a ton of stuff, and I think it keeps my mind open. It gives me some good historical context and all that. Starts out with ancient civilizations, history of the West, history of the East, all this stuff. It's wonderful. If you want to support the show and get some Liberty education, go to libertyclassroom.com. Check it out. I will have basically it's like affiliate marketing thing. So if you click on my link and then you go subscribe to it, I get a little kickback. So if you want to do both, like support the show and learn some stuff, use my link. I will actually start putting other ways you can support the show. I'm going to start recommending books. This episode, I'm recommending Radley Balco's book, Rise of the Warrior Cop. I think whether you are on the right or the left or somewhere in between, I think it's a really good book to understand and take a hard look at really how we would like police to interact with us and the community as a whole. So I'm going to recommend that book, and it's going to be a link to the Amazon site where you can buy the book, and I get a little kickback on that. So there's going to be a whole page on the website where you can click on it and click on the link, and then if you go purchase the thing, I get a little kickback. So it's also going to be in the show notes. I'm going to have the link for Liberty Classroom and the book Rise of the Warrior Cop. So if you click on any of those links, it'll take you. You can buy it. You don't have to pay any additional price, but I get a little kickback on it. So I'm being completely blatant as far as my motivations here, but I honestly do want you guys to check out some of these resources. They're wonderful. They've helped me substantially, and I think in the effort of keeping our minds open, trying to bring us together. I think they're good material to understand and talk about. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a wonderful time, and I will see you next time with next episode, and peace.